Welcome back to the MMcast Masters of Modern. I am your host, Alex Kessler, here with another special co-host, guest, Jim from the Spike Feeders. Hello, sir.
Alex, how you doing?
I'm good. I am, enjoying February. The weather is better. Apparently, for the rest of the country, I live in a hopeless void of 72 degrees. Not rubbing that in on purpose.
It's been a rough winter here. I've heard. Rough.
And the internet there's been no drama. It's been weirdly drama free for 3 weeks. I go on Twitter and everybody's like, man, everything is great. Yeah, this is wonderful. Kamigawa, full spoilers is out. We're doing our spoiler review next week for listeners. Ben will be back and there'll be some more like actual chances to play with the cards so we can give our thoughts on it by then. That's how's everything on your end?
It's going pretty good. Actually, Kamigawa I think looks sweet. There's I play like a deck that I call Bears and Cars, and Kamigawa has a lot of vehicle support.
That is true.
So it's pretty exciting.
That can drive those cars.
Yeah. Like it's kind of like it's also called. It's got a bunch of names, right? It's Bears and Cars, aka Too Fast, Too Furious, aka Death and Taxis. I didn't think up the Death and Taxis name, but it's actually like flawless.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I played against the deck. It's really fun to watch, and the names are like all amazing.
Yeah, and anyway, Kamigawa has like actual real vehicles that are like good in this deck. Because like a lot of people tag me and they're like, hey, is this good? Is this good? Is this good? And most vehicles are really horrendously bad.
Right.
But every once in a while you get these ones and they're awesome.
Yeah, I think with the vehicle mechanic, they swung for the fences with Kaladesh and they overstepped on a few of them.
Yes.
Really, maybe one of them, if we're like really honest, like maybe 3 of them were good in the set in like a standard environment, but only one like broke formats in a GTA-esque way or whatever. And then they like pulled back hard. They're like, no, this is a deciduous mechanic, but we are not going to push it out of fear of death.
Is absolutely tragic. Silent Submersible came out like fairly soon after Smuggler's Copter. Silent Submersible is a submarine, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would think that a submarine would have some kind of evasion, right? Like it's got maybe Skulk or like Island Walk, or something.
Anything.
Nothing. And I'm like 100% convinced that they removed any kind of evasion after the Smuggler's Copter fiasco.
So Smuggler's Copter was Kaladesh and the submarine was War of the Spark, right?
I think it was War of the Spark, yeah.
But that's still a few years. I always thought that Smugglers or the submarine got nerfed because they were afraid of Mono Blue Devotion. They like were doing it and it was there and it was right after Theros Beyond Death or like Theros Beyond Death was coming out and they're like, oh, what if we designed Thassa a 2, right? And it ends up being too good. And at the same time, I do think they were kind of like, and the problem with vehicles is that vehicles are not like equipment where there's a wider library of fun that comes with them in my head. Like they're either playable or stone cold, not a card you should be touching.
100%. Like, and most of that has to do with crew cost, right? Like, I think that when people look at vehicles, they often get like kind of dazzled by what they do. And then they realize like, oh, this thing has crew 5. You are never attacking with this creature. Like crew 5 means you need like 3 other creatures to crew it.
Right.
Like just about invariably. Or you're crewing it with a creature that you actually want to be attacking with, right? There's opportunity cost there.
Yeah, for sure.
3 creatures plus something to attack with 1 creature is like not a winning strategy.
It's a bad aggressive strategy and it's a bad defensive strategy. So when am I supposed to do this?
Yeah. But like they slap crew 1 on something like Cosima from Kaldheim.
Yeah.
Cosima, God of the Voyage, and then the Omen Keel on the backside. The Omen Keel is one of the best vehicles that's ever been printed. It is so good. But again, it's because it's a 2-mana vehicle that has crew 1. Right.
Well, and it has an artifact ability that doesn't really matter that it's a vehicle. Like I would say like Sky Sovereign saw a lot of standard play, but it saw a lot of standard play because it was a 5-mana lightning bolt that then if you had a creature created a massive evasive threat late
Yeah.
game.
Yeah,
And
it's like a 5-mana Inferno Titan
right.
with flying.
Right, which is like, okay, that's so pushed it makes it worth it.
Yes.
And it has an ETB, so if it's not doing anything, its worst case scenario dead mode is a 3 removal spell. And Heart of Kirin, which is the other played vehicle really from that era, uses Planeswalker loyalty abilities, or Planeswalker loyalty, so it like doesn't require you to tap anything, or doesn't require like all the problems with crew don't happen there. And so it's I'm excited for Kamigawa though, because I do think they've like figured out things. And I think the thing with Crew 1 that you brought up too is like, then you get in the world where you can use tokens or like utility things that you weren't going to use anyways to do a thing. And now you're upgrading your trash to treasure.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea behind this Bears and Cars deck. To give your listeners a general background behind it, the idea is we're using hate bears. It's not like actual 2/2 bears or actual like bear creature types. We're using hate bears. Things like Thalia, things like Dark Confidant is a great thing to crew vehicles with, and his what set was that from? I think it was original Theros, Painseer.
Sure.
That's the untap Dark Confidant. But crewing stuff like that, crewing stuff with Opposition Agent, crewing stuff with Hull Breacher, RIP, Dockside Extortionist. Like, think about, they're not all hate bears, but all these like dorky vehicles that happen to be on a body that you don't really use the body.
Right. It's an ETB effect or a static ability, or like you never played this card. Like Hate Bears as a deck in every format exists because you are playing cards that overreach their like power and toughness to affect the game. And while your opponent is having to deal with it, you're beating them down with like dumb things that like, oh, right. Like curving out is good. And I can't cast spells.
Yeah. And so like the idea behind that is that you can pick up a pretty decent threat. It allows you to like utilize the body of your hate bears so that they're not just like essentially enchantments on the battlefield, because that's what a lot of the time in EDH are using hate bears as essentially enchantments. But then it also provides you a little bit of resiliency against board wipes, which obviously is a huge thing. When you are dealing with sorcery speed for board wipes like Wrath of God, Damnation, all that kind of stuff, it means that only half of your creatures at any given time are actually creatures, which is really nice. So, if you get board wiped, you've still got like your threats are still there and you just have to rebuild the small stuff.
Sure.
So it's not like as devastating of a tempo loss.
I wonder if this is like actually portable to Modern now. I would have to like relook at what's in Kamigawa, but like the basic philosophy of what you're doing is not that hard to extrapolate into 60 card like formats. Like none of the axes you're attacking on are like commander specific, really.
Yeah.
Like Hate Bear deck existed in competitive 60 card 1v1 formats since Magic existed, maybe to some extent. And the ability to mitigate some of the problems that come with it, which is like your creatures get outscaled by Primeval Titans or whatever with vehicles that do something similar. And now I haven't even been able to wrap my head around, and that's one of the reasons I was like glad to wait for the set review for next week. All of the cards from Kamigawa that are coming out, but even like there are some very pushed equipment that like are out there now that previously didn't exist, and they've come up with cool ways. That's the one benefit, is I do think they've learned, right? I think that they've spent the last 4 years hiding from vehicles being too powerful and trying out different ways to get it to work, and maybe looking towards the next vehicle theme set where we're at to really kind of bring that to light.
Yeah. And I think like, so I don't know, having played with vehicles quite a bit in EDH, if you're considering them for EDH, generally speaking, crew costs of anything higher than like 3 are kind of a trap.
Sure.
You really have to assess them as like you're committing to attacking with one creature this combat. Crew 1, great. Love Crew 1. If Crew 1's on a vehicle, I'm taking a real hard look at it.
I think like when it comes to Kamigawa Limited as well, like something that is, in this design space, this samurai mechanic of the set, and like Exalted before that, right? Where it's you only want to attack with one thing, feels like probably, and like if I'm looking at it, it's probably like blue-white is the vehicle combo and white-black is the samurai combo, and the middle ground of if you're in white, you're either attacking with one creature or having vehicles, and it ends up that works together really well. So draft both.
Yeah. And I mean, it like that kind of exalted play works really well if you're picking up those kinds of things in limited. You really need an impactful like cornerstone of your deck. Like there's that one that makes the creatures that crew 2 instead of crew 1.
Yeah.
It makes like 1/1 tokens that crew 2. I forget what it's called, but that might even be a commander specific
I think
card.
that's
I
the
don't know if that's going to show
commander
up in draft.
that you tap it for 1. It's a blue-white. You discard a card, and then you make a 2/1.
Yes. Yeah.
And you maybe draw a card. I forget what the other hat. It's right here, conveniently. Thank you, Rick and/or Marshall, whoever's editing this video today, for putting the card next to me and the card name above my head. And it has all of those abilities, including for 1 mana tapping, discarding a card and making a 2/1, and maybe other things, or making a 1/1 that can pilot for 2, and maybe other things that it does that all of our audiences can read. So we're not here just to talk about vehicles today, though that is always fun to talk about. So before we get to the next step, Jim, for the people who don't know who you are, who are you? Why don't you start? Let's start there, or middlingly start there, whatever happens after starting.
I'm Jim. I run a YouTube channel called The Spike Feeders. We focus mostly on Commander, actually entirely on Commander, but we do have a second YouTube channel that deals with Flesh and Blood, if that's your thing. And then I'm also a member of the Commander Advisory Group. So we are a group of people that give advice to the Commander Rules Committee for recommending bans, unbans, rules changes, communications regarding the format, all that kind of stuff. We kind of are the eyes and ears on the ground of the format, so that the folks who make the rules can make good, informed decisions. I've been playing Magic for, I don't know, 10 years. Like technically 10 years. I played when I was a kid and then stopped and then came back like most people did.
Sure. Played during
sort
Tempest,
of in this iteration.
Then quit at some point between Tempest and Mirrodin, and came back some point between Mirrodin and Zendikar.
It was Tempest and Mirrodin for me. So, it's a pretty typical like Magic player story.
Right.
But we've been running the Spike Feeders for like 3.5 years now. And having a lot of fun with it. We focus mostly on the spikier, like more powerful side of the format, which I know can be a little bit controversial, which we're probably going to get into today.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll talk a little bit. Well, I think like one of the reasons I've wanted to have you on for a while now is because you do run like one of the largest. I don't know how the different cEDH channels kind of scale against each other, but you run one of the largest cEDH based YouTube channels and content creation houses, and are a part of, and that is taking what, depending on who you talk to, very casual or meant to be casual or semi-casual, very popular format, and then focusing on it in a way that's like, how do we make this at its peak level of competitiveness? And I would say our podcast, and our audience can sometimes disagree with us, has always strived to kind of take something that is modern, which is meant to be a 60 card 1v1 tournament based format, and not apply a casual attitude to it, but make it, make it like the point of this is to have fun, right? Like we trying cool stuff, doing cool brews, coming to the format with the idea that like most of the audiences of Magic in the world aren't winning a Pro Tour. And and that's just, there's only so many people that can do that, right? Including
you're speaking my language here. Like that's literally like what you just described there is why we started our YouTube channel. At the time, it's I would say it's changed pretty substantially in the past 3.5 years. I like to think that I was a part of that. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't, maybe I was just here while it happened. But one of the things that I wanted to show people, and I got sick of telling people, was that like, we're here having fun. Like we wouldn't do this if it wasn't fun. Like the EV on showing up to F&M with a $3,000 commander deck to win a $5 pack of cards. Like that's not good EV. You're never making your money back on that. Right. Like you said, like in my basement, nobody's making the Pro Tour. We're doing this just because we're having fun and goofing around, It's just like one of the things I always say is like the last time that I played Power Cube was at my buddy's cabin. It was for his bachelor party. And like I drafted a pretty disgusting deck. Like I curved out, I was like Mox Ruby into Black Lotus into like a turn 3 or 4. It was like Mox Ruby, Black Lotus, Lingering Souls, and then Elish Norn. I landed in Elish Norn on turn 4 with my Lingering Souls tokens. And he like scooped him up. We laughed about it, and then we went and jumped in the lake. Right? Like what I did there was objectively powerful, using objectively powerful cards, but the tone is more like Powered Cube than it is like the standard Pro Tour. You know?
Right.
Like we're just goofing around. You know,
well,
there's like the stakes have never been lower.
It's why I stopped playing in Grand Prix, right? Like I like realized I am very extroverted.
Really?
And yeah, fun fact. And a library of other issues. And and I would go to a Grand Prix, and eventually I was kind of miserable because I would be playing in this, like in the actual event, trying to win the thing or do well in it. And every single person I met by the end of that 10 to 40 minute conversation, one of us is going to hate the other one. And no matter how much you want to have a good vibe about that, like one of you is actively ruining the other person's chances of doing well in the tournament that they are struggling very hard to accomplish. And, add that to a layer of then, even if you go to a Grand Prix with friends, I know I'm doing a really good job of selling Grand Prix for this modern competitive podcast, but even if you go with a group of friends, the chances that their deck finishes at the same, like once they got rid of the lunch break, the chances that you even see each other is like a maybe. And then the conversation is extremely redundant, where you either say, oh, this is why I won, or this is why I lost. And then you don't see each other until maybe the end of the tournament. And so like, and then I realized, oh, no, wait, I like Modern because it's fun to come up with cool ideas. Yeah. Like if I'm going to play in a tournament, it's really there for the first like 6 rounds to try and get on coverage when all of the pros that have 4 buys aren't getting on coverage, so that they see which weird deck I've come up with. And then to go hang out with friends and play jam games 1v1 against each other, or do whatever ended up being fun at a Grand Prix, and meet people. And I think like in its essence, Magic is about having fun. Like even when you talk to Magic Pro players, like there's a reason a lot of them are also poker players, and it's because the EV on poker is higher, or the EV on, accounting, or, whatever many of the different Magic pros do on the side, or they're doing it because the EV is becoming a game designer, right? That's like the career path of like being a Magic the Gathering pro. Is you have like 3 options. You either are making money somewhere else because you're smart, and being smart lets you make money in many different ways. You are doing it to become a content creator, right? You like started writing for SEG before they canceled, their services. You were trying to do streaming. You're trying to build an audience to accomplish whatever you want, or you're doing it to become a game designer. You're doing the Andrew Brown route, where it's like, oh, Wizards, I have the weirdest meteoric ride in Pro Tour history, where I like went from not existing to top 8ing 3 Pro Tours, and I would like a job.
Yeah, it's the Gavin Verhey route, you know?
Right.
Yeah, it's like, so I've told people this quite frequently, but like when you have a really narrow definition of fun, it can be really tough to have fun, right? And like if you go to a GP expecting that like the only way that I'm going to have fun is if I win out, or if I like top 8 or something like that, you are like setting yourself up to be disappointed. Right.
The chances
it's exactly like you said, you got to diversify,
tiny. Yeah.
You got to say like, okay, well, what are the other things that I can have fun doing at a GP? Well, I can bring up one of my own brews. I can like enjoy exploring some design space that's not explored in Modern. I can enjoy meeting people. I can enjoy doing side events and doing drafts and doing all this other stuff that happens at GPs and meeting people. And it's the same thing in Commander, absolutely the same thing in Commander, right? Like if you tie 100% of your like self-worth or your enjoyment of the game on winning the pod, you're playing the wrong format. Like 25% win rate is great in Commander, right? But it still means that you're losing 3 games for every one that you win.
Right.
It is not the format where like winning can be your only marker of satisfaction in a game, you know?
Well, and like Magic the Gathering Las Vegas, not Magic Fest or Grand Prix Las Vegas. I now have to remember 3 different ways to refer to going to Las Vegas. It was the first event of that type since Reno, right? And since COVID happened. And I think one big thing that's happened is the propagation of this idea of cEDH, right? I even remember like at Reno or even at Vegas before that, kind of like cEDH was starting to become more popularized, but it was still a little bit not laughed at, but like it was kind of like a try hard. You know, a lot of the stereotypes that you still hear today about competitive players existed then, but was the only opinion in a public facing way. And I will give you 100% credit for being a force behind driving the change around this attitude. And, you know, at Vegas, the gathering, it was felt like there was a feeling in the air that like, oh, this is, and there's this great photo that you can find on the internet of a bunch of the different cEDH content creators that was there. You get to see who's taller between me, Jim, and Cal. I'm not the tallest. I was sad about that. Definitely standing on my toes in that photo as well. But it also felt important, and kind of my philosophy behind it is cEDH brings to the table a conversation of that didn't exist before. Now, if I have a friend who wants to do that, right, who wants to just be the very best that they can be, and isn't about necessarily I'm trying to win every single time, but is trying to play optimally and have the best possible cards in his deck to give him the best chance, there's a home for that person now. Like that, you know, in the Wild West of, you know, LGS Commander pre-COVID, the conversation on like, oh, there's just like the 4 to 6 guys who you all thought was kind of an asshole because they showed up with like lists they found on Reddit and like were, you know, just winning on turn 1 to 4 and had whatever level of expensive cards that you didn't feel like you were trying to put in all in one deck because you had 30 decks and they had their like one main or whatever focus,
and they keep it like in a briefcase, you know, the die cut foam briefcase.
They look like a Blues Brother, but in like the 2010s where it's no longer cool. And now, if that environment had like, oh hey, LGS, can you just create a pod that's meant for the cEDH table? And
we have a name for that.
Yeah, right? There's like they have fun, and they would have no problem with it because that's what they were trying to do, right? They weren't trying, you know, they were rarely trying to come to the table and be like, I want a pub stomp. It's I want to just do the best I can. And before cEDH was popularized, there was no way to talk about that. It was oh, you're just not believing in the spirit of the format and whatever.
The spirit of the format is something else, that's for sure. But we you know, it's funny, like we wanted to show people like you can have fun doing this, and there are other people out there that like enjoy having fun this way. But we also wanted to show people that like, because one of the big talking points, and actually this is still one of the big talking points, is like, why don't you just go play Vintage? Why don't you just go play Vintage? Like, first of all, nobody plays Vintage, so
right.
Like I can't go play Vintage. That's just like not an option. And the second
you can suffer through Moto, or if you double click on the wrong thing, you lose money.
yeah, exactly. But the other thing is that like cEDH actually provides. I'm not sure like how familiar your audience is going to be. I know that you and Ben have played some cEDH and whatnot, but cEDH provides some pretty unique experiences in the greater like Magic ecosystem. Like cEDH does not feel like playing Vintage. It's different.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Like this is it's not the same thing. Like multiplayer dynamics, having consistent access to a single card in your opening hand and throughout the rest of the game. Like there are a lot of little things.
I'm sorry. Currently Luris is legal in Vintage, so it sounds like the exact same thing.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same format, right? But like different cards are good. Like it's not the same thing, right? Like people don't realize that there are a lot of like distinctively Commander experiences that exist in cEDH. When I say distinctively Commander experiences, like these are things that happen in cEDH that could not happen in any other Magic format.
Sure. Well, so like an example of that from at least my experience is I would say that cEDH is the most communal game of Magic I've ever played, which is like kind of an insane statement, or like not what you would think from the outside say, right? Like you'd think, oh, this is the one where they're going to be the most cutthroat, but people are lying to you. That doesn't go away, but that's true in every community. But every action that's taken has a thought of how is this best going to lead to victory, or to prevent this person from winning, from beating us, right? Because it's a 3v1 strategy. So you're like the fact that I've like played a cEDH game where I was like, oh, I can stop this person from winning, but I have to pact myself to death. And like Cal was like, no, don't. I'm not going to let you do that. Because the point is for you to try and win for yourself. It's not, and we can work together to try and stop this person. If we can't together, don't kill yourself for the two of us. Let the person win. They've taken that, right? And it's like that would never happen in a regular Commander game. In a regular Commander game, it'd just be like, they made a mistake, get them.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's like I agree. It does offer a lot of very different conversations about how to play, and then also obviously the gameplay experiences themselves are different.
Yeah, like one of the things, this is like an old cEDH deck now, but one of the things that I point to is, do you know the card Momir Vig, like the legendary creature Momir Vig?
Oh yeah. I have an artist book somewhere in this apartment.
At one point, there was a cEDH deck. It's like not considered like part of the cEDH meta anymore, but I point to it because it is like a very uniquely Commander thing. The cEDH deck built around it was based on using like magical hack effects, the color changing spells in Magic.
Oh, interesting. Okay, because for those who don't know, Momir Vig is a card that when you cast a green spell, you tutor for a creature and you put it on top of your library. And if you cast a blue spell, you get to draw a card. And so if you cast a blue-green spell, you just straight up tutor. And if you just and either side you get to draw a card or you get to worldly tutor.
Yeah. So the idea is if you play like magical hack or any of these like trait doctoring, these like color changing effects, you can change all instances of blue on Momir Vig to green. And then every time you play a green creature, you tutor up a green creature.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So you can chain together elves and put together the legacy elves like Heritage Druid, Nettle Sentinel combo with Phantasmal Image. And just tutor up the entire combo and play it on a turn, make infinite mana from your deck.
Well, now you have walking, like the tools you have now even are like, you have Walking Ballista, right? Or you can even, is there a blue, there isn't a blue way to turn Heritage Druid on. But okay.
Yeah, but I mean, you can play like Nettle Sentinel.
Yeah.
You can play Nettle Sentinel and Phantasmal Image. Any kind of clone effect, Phyrexian Metamorph, like all those, right? But yeah, that's like a very distinctively Commander thing, right? Like you wouldn't build a deck around that interaction because you don't like necessarily have consistent access to it in 60 card formats.
You can't get, it's kind of how the companions kind of upended all of competitive Magic, where it's like, oh, now that I can guarantee having access to a specific effect from existence, I can now build my deck expecting it in a way that you can't normally. And once you have Commander in there where the options are so much more massive, that changes drastically how you decide what cards you're playing.
How you approach deck building, right? It's a totally different approach to deck building. That, and then plus multiplayer dynamics. Like you mentioned a couple things about playing in a multiplayer environment, but like you have to pay attention to untap mana from 3 players. You have to like pay attention to derived information, how people are talking about when they tutor stuff, like all of this stuff. There's just more of it, onboard effects from 3 players instead of 1. The fact that you can kind of politic your way around based on your order in priority sequence. Like if somebody casts a spell and I'm first to act, I can kind of bully the people that are later on in priority by passing priority, even if I've got interaction. If I know that they've got interaction, if somebody like mystical tutored for a counterspell or something, if I know for whatever reason that like somebody has interaction, like maybe not that they've tutored for it, but maybe it was revealed when they drew it, or I could Taxian probe them or something like that. If I know that they've got interaction, I can just pass priority and make them use it, or we all lose the game, right? And a lot of the time, if you're like not playing competitive EDH, somebody might resent that and just like not do it and just punt and lose the game.
Right.
But like in cEDH, like it's like, okay, you got me. It's just one of those multiplayer dynamic things.
I have the disadvantage of being the first person after this other person, so that they will always have the opportunity to counter my spell. But I have the advantage of being the last or the first person before you being the last person. You have the disadvantage of being the last person during this person's turn, and therefore you are the one that we can force to act, or we all lose. So we can force you into that position and taking advantage of that. Well, and I think something that's interesting about cEDH is, so like I've been friends with Ben for maybe now 10 years, which is a different wild version of reality. But and I've been playing Commander for much longer than that. And had always tried getting Ben into it, and he's always been resistant. And he'd always be like, "Oh yeah, I played like in high school, but like I'm not interested or whatever." And like you'd always like cite like, "Oh, multiplayer is bad because you can't count on your opponents making the right decisions or whatever, what have you." And then literally you and Braden, who like worked with me to convince Ben to play a game of cEDH, and you know he played it, he loved it. He then like realized that the thing he likes about Modern, which is coming up with new ideas and concepts, he didn't have the time or the brain space to like learn the cEDH metagame enough to be able to be a brewer in that space. But then that brought him to playing regular Commander. It was like the entree way he got to just being a Commander player. And
that's funny. That's like the opposite of a lot of people's entry into the format.
Yeah. It's fascinating to watch. Well, it's, Ben's a very specific person. So I don't know if that's replicatable by everyone, but it was... Yeah, coming from I play competitive, because, it was also in the middle of COVID, right? It was like in the middle of it happening. So it was also like, we're not playing Modern right now because there just isn't any to play. And so how do I get my Magic fix? It was like, well, why don't you try cEDH with me? I've never played it. These are some friends who like are content creators in the space, and we can do a stream about it, and you can try playing competitor that way and see if you like it. And if you like it, we can play more. And now he plays every week. So
it's sweet. It's a very different like set of muscles, like it is kind of like a competitive format, but it's also kind of not, like I was mentioning, like we're in my basement, like nobody's making the Pro Tour. We're still brewing up goofy decks that do random stuff. They're just like cranked to 11, know?
Right.
And in that way, it's kind of cool because it's a brewer's paradise. If you think of like a nugget of something, like one of the things that's coming out of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, you might see this in other formats too. But the Swift reconfiguration, the 1-mana aura.
Yeah, it's turn a creature into a
crew 5 vehicle.
A crew 5 vehicle. Yeah.
So that makes infinite mana with Devoted Druid.
Right.
Because you can stack up -1/-1 counters on it, and it doesn't die
until you turn it into a creature. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a pretty resilient combo.
It goes like weirdly infinite with like a few different effects too, because it's just like anything that like when
counts
you
on being a creature,
negative effect on being a creature, then it's just like, oh, I don't have that anymore. Great.
Yep. So it's really sweet. And so like it also does a bunch of really weird stuff with some commanders. Like you can put it on Winota, Joiner Forces. And then if you crew it to attack, it's no longer a human because it loses its subtypes. And so it triggers itself. Or if you've got like commanders that have static effects that don't really care about them being a creature, like Najeela caring about other warriors attacking, you can just turn your Najeela into like a rock, basically. And then it still triggers when other warriors attack.
Yeah.
But anyway, this Devoted Druid combo, it's the kind of thing where you're like, oh, okay, I now have like a nugget of something. Let me surround it with the best cards that I possibly can from Magic's entire catalog from the whole history of Magic and see what I can do with this, right? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it means that like when new cards come out, you're like, oh, this is kind of a neat thing. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's see if this is like the real deal, So there are a lot of extremely creative people brewing cEDH decks. More so than me. I don't do a lot of brewing. I used to quite a bit, but I just don't have the time with content creation. I don't have the time to play Magic, let alone brew decks. But
right. I don't know what it's like. I have all the time in the world.
But yeah, if you're the type of person, like I know the typical thing is people are like, oh, well, it's a competitive format. Everybody's just net decking. Well, not really. Like you can if you want, I guess. But if you understand the meta, if you take the time to learn what people are playing and you know enough about Magic to brew against it, you can.
Right. And it's like, it's a format where like people more than I think any other place in Magic have also been like really like totally okay with proxying. Like it's like, yes, please play with whatever you want. Cause the point of this is I want you to be the very best you can be so I can see if, and that's like a spirit that I feel like Modern, not because proxies aren't allowed in tournaments, but the spirit behind it and that's kind of like where I think Modern competitive play is and why cEDH feels so similar to me, where if I'm not playing in a tournament, I'm still trying to win. Like I've never played against a game with Ben where every single action I was taking wasn't to win, but it's not like oh, I'm stressing about it. If I lose this, I'm going to be sad. If I win, I get to feel better than Ben, which is a great feeling.
Yeah.
But I don't like get anything. There's a much more casual vibe around it.
Well, and like, so one of the things that I've been talking to the rules committee about recently is that I feel like when we talk about competitive, like when somebody says, oh, that's competitive, or when they say like EDH is not a competitive format, it really often feels like shorthand for like a bunch of negative behaviors that kind of hover around competitive spaces.
Sure.
It's stuff like opportunism and ankle shooting, where like if you've got a new player and you have the opportunity to take advantage of something that they don't know, when you're in a competitive environment, it's okay to do that because like they showed up and they should know and they'll know for next time, right?
It's the rule. It's the like rules lawyery vibe of like, oh, you didn't at the exact moment of your turn you're supposed to remember to exile. What's the black white legend that drains people when it enters or whatever?
Obsidat.
Yeah, you didn't forget the exact moment Obsidat did. You did it like in your cleanup step versus your end step, and I'm gonna call a judge on you. And it's like, okay.
Or when somebody asks you like, hey, can I name Gaia's Cradle with Pithing Needle? And you say yes, it's like, yeah, that is the correct answer.
Right.
But like, that's not what they're asking. Come on, man.
Yeah. Like, or like I think my favorite is the Inkwell Leviathan trick, right? Where like Guy was playing Japanese Inkwell Leviathans in his Legacy, I think at the time, Reanimator deck. And someone's like, oh, what is that? It was a Japanese like, oh, what is it? What does it do? Or like, what are some of its abilities or something vague enough where he got away with only listing Shroud and it's a 7-11 and didn't say Island Walk, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll let that resolve, and then like they attack like, oh, I block, and like, oh no, it has Island Walk, and then they're like,
and so like in a competitive environment, that's the kind of thing where it's like when somebody gets got like that, they're going to feel bad about it, right? Because then they're like, oh man, I would have made a different decision if I had all of the relevant information going into it, right? Like if I was fully informed, then I would have made a different decision. And that like, it's all free information and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, I got, but that's generally a pretty negative social experience.
Right.
And so that's where like the contrast in EDH, it's kind of like the difference between playing Magic at a GP or playing Magic at an FNM, right? Like they even change the way that rules are enforced and all that kind of stuff because it's the judging at regular instead of the IPG and the MTR. Or even like the environment is explicitly intended to like create an environment where people are okay learning things and people don't have to be like on high alert.
It's a good example too is like testing versus tournament play. Like if I am testing a deck out to see if it's viable to play in Modern and I'm playing against you, the point of that is to see if this deck is viable. It's not to see like, can you get me on my rule? And like, you'll call, like maybe you like point out like, hey, that's not the rule, but you're not going to be like, oh no, don't take that mistake back. Cause then you just wasted your time. Like why, like I only have so much time to play these games. I'd rather us learn the information that's valuable, which is Storm good right now? Not does Alex know the exact way he should be triggering his gut shot, at what point of the chain, right? So it's what's more valuable with your time, having a good time or, being able to play the game or like trying to angle shoot to a win.
Right. Yeah. And so like, I feel like when we talk about competitive, we're often referring like in a kind of backhanded way to a lot of those behaviors where people like a lot of us kind of understand that that's like part and parcel with a lot of competitive environments. And it's not just Magic. It's like, fighting game communities and like everywhere where there is competition, like sports, organized sports has a lot of this stuff.
There's a reason that the League of Legends community has not a good reputation.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So when you think of like, competitive, when it's used like as a slur, we're often talking about those types of antisocial behaviors. And when I play cEDH, I don't see a lot of those things. I see like the stuff that you described, like the cEDH community has its warts like any other community has. I'm not going to get into a ton of those, but DM me and we can talk about it forever if you want. But I don't see a lot of those things in the cEDH community because at the end of the day, it's like just a different activity that we're socializing over. It is very social. Like when if somebody is across the table from me and they're doing like some non-deterministic storm combo, like they're going off with you know, I don't know, 1,000 Year Storm or something like that, and they're just cantripping, or they're playing like Prosper Ad Nauseum or something like that. Like, you might have somebody else at the table that's tracking their storm count and somebody else at the table that's tracking their floating mana, just to like help things go along. Like, you're not looking to get them because they like sequence things wrong. Right. Like, it takes a little bit of the mental load off of them so that they can concentrate on their game actions without having to track 10 different things at the same time. Like, you probably wouldn't have that at a GP. That's just not like a behavior that somebody would.
Well, and this kind of like, this brings me to one of the things I wanted to talk about today, where, you know, now it might have been 3 weeks ago, but, you know, when the modern ban announcement happened, right, there was the nothing happened, right? For those who didn't know, Ragavan, Urza Saga, all these cards are still legal. People may have different opinions. Luris is the one that actually people were.
Those cards are nutty.
We get to play with fun things here. But there was like a lot of kind of this thought pattern post fact of like, Wizards, we need you to manage. Sorry, that happened, and then literally the next day, Star City Games canceled their entire run of competitive content creation, and that was like a long way in the running, but it like happened both in 2 days of each other, and you know,
pretty rough time to be a Modern fan,
right, and well, Modern's, it's weird because Modern is in a weird space, but we can get into that too. But the other piece of that is that just like the world of competitive Magic has collapsed, and anyone who argues, which there was a lot of bad faith arguments during that day, that it has anything to do with other than the fact that there's a global pandemic, is not thinking about it correctly, and that is a kind way of me saying that, or is being manipulative for reasons beyond just that, and is maybe mad about it because it does suck. Like, I am here to say it sucks, right? I'm like, COVID sucks.
From the outside looking in on that, like, I sympathize. I really do. Like, it sucks to have something that is close to you and something that's important to you and something that you have like spent a lot of time and effort like working to get good at, and just have like the rug pulled out from under you. It sucks.
Right. Like, and totally sympathetic. And you know, the plan is for that to eventually come back. When you talk to anyone for Wizards, they're like, we literally can't schedule anything because like for my perspective, you know, look at New York Toy Fair, right? I don't know if you know this, but there's every February for literally 100 years, there's New York Toy Fair. It happens in New York. And for some reason it's in February, and it's based on like 1950s toy buyer habits, but it's always the coldest weekend of the year. I've been in New York for every record-breaking snow they've ever had, which is a weird thing I can say. But the literally was canceled January, like it was happening January 15th, and it was not happening January 16th because of what happened over the holidays. And how do you, like, the infrastructure to build a competitive environment, which I didn't want to go too deep into this, to build a competitive environment takes a significant amount of investment to then be happening. And if it's not happening, you have to cancel everything. So that like there needs to be kind of a wait and see to see what's the world look like. And then you build it up again. And it's not like at the time that COVID happened, which is like a little bit of the perfect storm. It was broken at that point already, right? The MPL wasn't working the way it was supposed to. And so there was going to be a restructuring of what that looked like anyways. And now a lot of the people that were doing it no longer work somewhere else, right? So you like, there's a void of expertise on top of all of these issues, just if you wanted to restructure it.
Yep.
That being said, immediately after those, unless you have, I can, if you have something to say first.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that a lot of this stuff probably would have happened to Commander 2 if it wasn't for the incredibly timely development of Spell Table.
Sure. Agreed.
Like, I cannot underestimate how much work that Spell Table put in for keeping the Commander community like as vibrant as it is. Honestly, I think a lot of people would have just stopped playing Commander because it's not as accessible when you're playing on Discord. It's not as accessible when you can't click on the cards. You know,
I do also think that like Commander benefits from two other features that allowed it to survive during like a digital Magic era that's not a program. One is its casual status, and more in the sense that like if you cheat, I don't really care.
Yeah.
And like,
I usually tell people if they need the win that bad, they can have it.
Yeah, like I'm here to be your emotional support. If you really need to win today and you need to like put that Soul Ring on top of your deck, go for it.
Do it. Go little rock star.
So there's not the need of being so specific on making sure people aren't doing that. Like you can't run a modern tournament through Spell Table. Without a lot of trust.
No, 100%. Anything like huge on the line, no, it's not the appropriate.
And I think the other one is like the social aspect of Commander that allows you to have 4 people. I think one of the reasons like the Commander streams like Olivia's stream have been so successful, and like stuff like even our modern stream that we now are doing on Sundays, we're trying to figure out the best way to do it, because 1v1 Magic is a quiet activity.
Yes, it is.
I am not trying to talk to you too much. Now, if you can make an effort to do it, but inherently it's a learned habit you have to pick up, versus 4-player, where when someone's turn is happening, the other people can talk about whatever they want.
Yeah. Olivia's stream is very it's very incidentally Commander.
Right, exactly.
There is Commander happening, but that's not what the stream's about.
And so yes, I agree that those two things have definitely been, and I also think like a small part is, yes, there's a lot of Magic players that, are married or have kids or are single. And so during quarantine, we're on their own. But there's a lot of Magic players that have roommates or we're living in their little, like my 7 people or 8 people pod of people I'm willing to hang out with, and we'll all quarantine with each other. And I think those groups are also kind of keeping it alive to an extent. But you can't officially TO, because then there's like a company putting you in an environment that's public that has its issues. But okay, so the reason I'm bringing all this up is, so those 2 announcements happened the same day. All of SCG is canceling their pro article circuit, and Wizards doesn't ban anything in Modern, which a lot of people think that maybe Luris should be banned. And there's other cards that are on that list, and we've done 18 episodes on the effects of Modern Horizons on Modern, and whether it's good or bad. And I make TikToks on it every day beyond that, so check out there. But basically the next day there was this sentiment, and it kind of was it built off of something Sheldon wrote in a recent post.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. He, in a well-said way, said something along the lines of, Magic should be for a large audience of people, but Commander can't be what every kind of player wants to play. And we need to figure that out. And that then became kind of slowly parroted as, because pro Magic is going badly, all of these pro players are coming to Commander and ruining it.
Yep. And like, I think that there's a level of depth even beyond that. Like, that is a pretty good assessment of what Sheldon said. And then a pretty good assessment of like how a lot of people perceived what he said. But I think that there's actually another layer there too. And that's that, okay, this is a fairly, it may be controversial to say, but one of the things, in my mind at least, one of the things that's the most important for me about Commander is that it's a space where people can be creative, like what we were talking about. Like you can express yourself through deck building. You can be like, I think that this is cool, this is unique, this is something that I've done, this is something that nobody's ever done. You can like identify with your deck and say like, I built something that nobody has ever built before. It does stuff that nobody has ever done before. This is a me deck. Like there's a piece of me in this. And it can be pretty tough in an environment where people are telling you that you're doing things wrong because you're not doing things that are good, And I mean good in the sense of like effective, efficient, like solid deck building fundamentals and stuff like that. And you see this a lot on Twitter. Every once in a while, the like Twitter discourse turns to some pro player that says something like, Commander players don't play enough lands or something like that, right? And they'll say like,
I've started the controversy once.
And you're like according to like this Frank Carson article and like that kind of thing, you're like, Commander players should be on average playing like 5 more lands. And it's like, okay, yes, you're correct, but also I don't care.
Sure. Right.
And so it can be kind of tough that like if you get enough of those voices of people telling the folks that are here because they want to be creative, if you get enough of a chorus of voices telling them you're doing it wrong, then they just leave. they're like, okay, well, this obviously isn't the place for me because the only way that I can be good at playing Commander is by like building my decks according to a rigid formula, you know?
Sure.
When that's not really like what, like, I don't know. I built decks like some weird decks. That is like when I'm most satisfied playing Commander is when I'm getting real weird. Like I have a deck that plays 65 lands because it's an ad nauseum deck, and it plays actually a lot like Seismic Swans. I don't know if you're familiar with Seismic Swans. It's like an ad nauseum deck, and you just draw like 50 lands, and then you cast Seismic Assault and just pitch on people.
Nice. Yep.
It does like maybe 30 damage.
Right,
you know?
right.
It's not
almost kill one person.
Yeah, it's like it's for sure not good.
As someone who I have a Bergamos built deck, and I try to give that guy infect and double activated abilities because trying to kill someone with just his regular ability does not really work.
Yeah, it's like not good, but it's a fun deck to play. I like it. You know, I have another deck that plays 38 like 0-drop cards. It's my casual Flash Hulk deck. Flash is banned in Commander, but I play Flash Hulk because I want to get every single 0-drop creature in my colors. It's a Riku. It's a Temur deck. I just want to get like 15 0-drops into play. And then sometimes I'll like grab a Perforos with it too and just donk people for like, again, maybe 25.
Sure.
But yeah, it's that's the kind of thing where if I'm doing something like that, where like my markers of satisfaction are very clearly not like, I'm going to win this game and like I need to build my deck in a certain way to accomplish that. I'm looking to do something totally different. I just want to do something weird and different. And if I have enough people telling me like that Commander deck sucks because, you know, you don't have a correct curve or you're not playing the right number of lands and stuff like that, it's like, you know what, I'm just going to go play a different game. So that can be kind of tough. And that is, I think, is the attitude when Sheldon talks about, you know, people coming in from other formats and bringing in philosophies from other formats. First of all, they don't necessarily translate 1v1 to Commander. And second of all, they don't always have the same set of priorities that are important to ensure that a certain type of player has a place to play Magic. So it's not really that they're like pushing players out. They just kind of have to acknowledge the fact that that their expertise in one area doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one to a new place.
Right. And the argument there is because a lot of pro players have such loud voices, and by that I mean followings and platforms, that is where Sheldon was really pointing at.
Yes.
And that's a totally different sentiment that is like and definitely agreeable, where it's like and you know, to even not to jump too much into that everyone should play more lands argument with Frank Karsten, as the person who like accidentally started this one of the times on like a Channel Fireball stream, was that, you know, in Commander, the math on what type of lands you should play functions differently due to the fact that it's a 4-player game, that you have 40 life on, that you have an extra hour of time to play, where unless you're in cEDH, most players are also actively like forgiving of people if they are behind on mana or are in a behind position, added to a layer of having the consistency of whatever your commander is being always there for you.
And a more forgiving mulligan rule.
Yes.
You get to see twice as many cards before you start going down in hand size.
And that's if people hold you to it.
Yes.
Like the amount
like on Olivia's stream, we never hold people to the real mulligan rule. It is literally just keep drawing cards.
The amount of games I played where I've had to go down on cards actually while mulliganing is exclusively cEDH games, because otherwise that format is broken if you don't follow a mulligan rule.
And then also like the other thing is that like curves are higher. A lot of people don't start doing anything until turn 3 in a lot of Commander games.
Right.
And people play a lot more like actually objectively busted ramp that is like not allowed in other formats because it's too good.
Like when you count my deck of 33 lands, I also count Sol Ring as the 34th land, because that's what that is. It is a basic land.
Yeah, like Watsy. Like I think a lot of the people that are playing Magic today have never actually played a format where Llanowar Elves is legal, right? But you can't print Llanowar Elves into Standard too often because it's too good. Like they printed Elvish Mystic, I guess. In
Dominaria had Llanowar Elf, was I think the last time, so that's not too far away. Yeah. But
I mean,
it's like, still like it is a special moment in Standard when Llanowar Elf is legal.
Right. Like you can't print Lightning Bolt into Standard. It's too good.
Only
all of these cards. Yeah. Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, like Wild Growth.
Just signets.
Yep.
So Tom Lapilli, used to be a Magic designer, got there from a cube design. It, at the time was just like, we just need a player. If you want to work here and you're committed to come up with something cool on the internet and do it for a while, that is impressive to us. And so he started a cube website, and he eventually got to the point where like no one should have signets in their cube unless it's meant to be a hardcore power cube. And I would even argue you should cut them from power cubes. They make cubing worse. And it's just because the mana is so much better. It's the reason that like when you did Modern Horizons 1 draft and 2 drafts, you cut lands for every bounce land you had in your deck because the format was slow enough and those counted as 2 lands. It has 2 mana symbols on it.
Yep. 100%. Like a lot of Commander players don't realize if you only play Commander, if you started playing Commander and have only played Commander, a lot of people don't realize like just how disgustingly powerful Sol Ring is. Right. Like they kind of get.
We'll talk about that in a little bit too.
Yeah, I think they get blinded by the fact that it's like a $5 card, and they don't realize that like if it hadn't been printed every year for the past 15 years, it would be more expensive than Mana Crypt.
I mean, like think about just that sentence, right? This is a card that has not been printed every year for the last 10 years. It is a card that has been printed in 5 guaranteed products every year for the last 10 years. And in the last 4 years has been printed in 4 product releases every year, 4 times a year, and is still a $5 card.
Yeah, and it's still a $5 card. Yeah, that's exactly it.
And is only played in a format where you don't need more than 1 copy of a card. Yes.
Yep. It's wild. Like the card is, and I mean, like I know your audience probably realizes how disgusting Sol Ring is.
Sure.
It really is.
Cards that are accompanying that in Modern are banned. Yes. Yeah.
But it also means that you have to evaluate your mana bases differently. Plus, the fact that fetch lands are legal, you essentially get 2 copies of every shock land, right? Mm-hmm. If you're playing revised duels.
Right.
Like it's trivially easy to hit like 2 blue and 2 black mana pips on turn 2 in Commander, right?
You're gonna do it every game. I would say it's probably harder in Commander than in Modern, but it is not like more easy than most other formats, right? Like that aren't like.
But you can do it in a 5-color deck,
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You also have the 40 life buffer, and you're finding revised or dual lands, and so even if you go down to 30 to do it in Modern, I've sacrificed my life total to accomplish this to the point where I am very aggressively going to have to protect myself, or I'm playing Death Shadow, and I have a 13 mana, 13 or 1 mana, 13, exactly. 13. One of those 2 options. The other one is like you also have a large library of very powerful lands you get to play with that can mitigate getting flooded. So there's it's definitely like and it's a wide variety of things. But your point on taking from a PR perspective those attitudes, but then the problem, and this is kind of where I was, because at that point, by the time we got to them canceling Star City Games article list, it had sprinkled down, and the way that discourse does, and the attitude was closer to pro players at a not like PR level perspective, but just like competitive old SEG grinder levels are the reason that that Commander has become more aggressive. And that I think is the thing that I disagree with, because I think 3 things have happened, right, that have caused this. I think it's just the momentum of the world. I think if you are a player, which I think most players in Magic are, that every time they play their Commander deck or any deck they play, and they think after playing what worked, what didn't, I'm going to switch some cards out. Unless you're playing like stock lists that you're like, just like net deck, which is fine, like to win a tournament, like, and you don't understand what needs to be switched out. Like there's not a Commander deck I own. And really, I would say there's not, like, my 2 Modern decks that I have built right now have 30 card sideboards. Maybe one of them has a 60 card sideboard of cards that I like don't know which one I should be playing. Like it has a full set of Archmage Charms and Cryptic Commands and Snapcaster Mages and Solitudes and a Kahira. And depending on what I'm doing, blue-white control is going to be whatever I feel like that day. And Commander is not much different, where like I have a pile of cards like, oh, that didn't make the cut the first time, but oh, I like this card was bad. Wasn't fun. It didn't do the thing. It cost too much mana. It cost too little mana, or, whatever. And so I'll cut that for another one. And I think that action will just push the momentum of any format towards a more powerful state. Like it's the heat death of the universe, right?
Well, I think people often will misattribute this to content creators as well. I think it's very common thing for people to say, well, the reason why Commander is speeding up is because of EDH Rec, or because of
the command zone,
the internet, or because of the command zone pushing specific cards or whatever. And in a sense, I think that is like fine, but like, as well as I do, when you're talking about marketing or SEO or stuff like that, stuff doesn't get popular because people don't like it.
Right.
If this was something that people didn't want to do, it wouldn't be a popular thing on YouTube. Content creators can't dictate trends like that. Like the direction of causality is reversed there, I think.
Right. Agreed.
Like the idea is when somebody on YouTube or whatever does something that has like mass appeal, that appeals to people, that's what gets popular, because people search for it and people watch it. It's not that they're telling people to get more competitive and that blind sheep are kind of, shuffling off
Jimmy
into that
said
direction.
That I shouldn't play this card, so I'm not going to. It's more like, oh, I watch Jimmy because he is a person who's making content that I agree with. And yes, you're right. I shouldn't be playing this, or I should be playing Vidalcan Ari in every deck or whatever.
Yeah. So I think that like a lot of the time when people talk about the format getting more aggressive or the format getting faster or stuff like that, I think that a big part of it is actually people realizing that they like to play more powerful stuff. It's kind of like Malcolm Gladwell has a talk about pasta sauces, like tomato sauces.
Sure.
About how it used to be that you could only get one kind of tomato sauce until I think it was Ragu decided to make a whole bunch of different kinds of pasta sauce, and like one was chunky and one was whatever, and like there was no market data on chunky pasta sauce because it didn't exist before they made it. So nobody was out there asking for chunky pasta sauce because it wasn't the thing that you could get.
Right. It's like, oh, I didn't know chunky pasta sauce could exist.
Right. And so like, if it's not something that you're aware of, that exists, or something that you've never tried, then it's not something that you really know that you want. But then when you try it and you like it, then you're like, oh, well, this is like where I like playing. And then they just stop playing at a different power level. Right. So I think a lot of the time it's just sort of not a power level that people were aware that they could play at. And then when they've tried it, they enjoy it. And that's just where they play.
Right. And I think some of it is also like, I think there's a few things. I think nostalgia is a negative thing. Not all the time in life, but a lot of the time in life, nostalgia causes negative things to happen, because it's always like looking back at something that was never as good as you probably remember it as, but because memory works that way, you then compare it to modern times and you're like, oh, now sucks. It's not as good as I remembered it being, which in a lot of times, like looking at the old era of power levels, or like, oh, my old cards used to see play a lot, is like, Magic has always been releasing new product. I think that's like part of it, right? Is like there's always going to be new stuff that comes into the format. It's always going to update what decks are viable. There's never been a moment in time that you can slice it and be like, that's the purest form of Magic the Gathering. And the attitude of like, oh, this is different than what I used to like. And like the commander I used to have fun with, like, but that commander was different than the commander that existed 5 years before that, when Elder Dragons were the only thing that was legal in the format. And there were like one foil cards. Every card had to be foil. Otherwise you couldn't, there's like things change. And that doesn't necessarily mean bad, though it does mean the things that you maybe are nostalgic for aren't exactly what exists anymore.
Yeah, well, and like a lot of the people lament a lot of the stuff that we've lost along the way, as the formats become more popular, as there's been people like with varying, tastes and preferences and all that kind of stuff. Like when I first started playing Commander, I didn't start playing right at the very beginning, but there were 3 Jeskai commanders.
Oh,
if you wanted to play Jeskai, you could play, like, I think this was right around maybe like Khans of Tarkir.
Oh no,
it was before Khans of
Tarkir. There was the 3 Jeskai legends that were in the deck. It was Zedru, the Dragon,
Ruhan,
and the Dragon.
Yeah, and
the original one.
Yeah, and that was it. And so like like, okay, yeah, there are maybe some things that were better about Commander then, but also if you wanted to play Jeskai, you just like pretty much couldn't.
Yeah. Oh, and then Narset's the next one, right? Which is not exactly like the most fun card to exist. And then one of the reasons I think like I always forget his name, but the 3-mana, he's like it was like Narset, who's so powerful that it's unfun to play against, immediately followed by this card that like is super niche and also like all about attacking. And it was always like, what do you do with Jeskai for years?
Yeah. Shu Yan.
Shu Yan. Yes, there we go. Got it.
We did it.
Hey, Shu Yan. I'm glad you're doing good. I totally remembered your name.
Yeah. But yeah, and so like there's also a whole bunch of things now. You can pick pretty much whatever you want. If you want to play Jeskai, there's a ton of options, right? Like actually a ton of options. So yeah, I don't know. There's also been a lot of really great advances in people's ability to be creative and express themselves through deck building.
Yeah, and like even just looking at color imbalance, right? Like there is an era of Magic where literally black, green, and blue were just significantly better than what the other two colors were doing by margins. And white was better than red for a while because it just had more board wipes and hate bears. But like really, it was those three, and then just over time, red has gotten a lot more powerful cards that are doing a lot cool things.
That's an understatement.
Has gotten some broken cards, but also like a design space that's more applicable to a larger variety of Commander and or just gameplay in general, even in Modern, right? Like it used to be funny because Kiki Jiki was the only mythic in red mythic card that wasn't part of like a cycle that was mythics printed in every Modern Horizon set. Because if you looked at every playable card that red played in Modern, none of them were close to mythic.
Kess, do you mean to say that people don't play multi-format All-Star Comet Storm?
Have I cast Comet Storm in my life ever? In Comet Storm's defense, broken in Modern Horizon 2 Limited.
Yeah. I actually pulled a foil Comet Storm from Modern Masters 2015 from the cardboard boxes.
Yeah. Like, your tournament's going to go great. You're going to win some other Modern Horizons packs, and hopefully the dollars are in those ones because you just lost $8. But yeah, so like, and there's, and Ragavan is an example of that in Modern, but Dragon Rage Channeler is, and Prosper, and like that's like even color combos, even if there were a lot of black-red options, all of them were bad in Commander for a long time, right? So like, there's definitely been this like a larger variety of play, and then now that's happening with white, right? We've started seeing it. They've said they're going to do it. We had Andrew Brown on a few weeks ago, and even he was like, I think they maybe have gone too far from what I know is coming out in the future.
Well, like when I was talking to Ari, I said to them like, the only thing that I want to see in white is to be able to be proactive, right?
Right.
Because one of the things, okay, so like I know that we're not going to get on a huge tangent with white unless you want to.
We might. Who knows?
Okay, so I've got two issues with white. Number one, I think that a lot of historically green design space should be white, and actually blue to some extent too. I think that enchantment-based ramp like Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl should be white. I think that there should be counter spells for activated abilities. I think it should be white, activated triggered abilities. And it also needs depth on removal. Because one of the things that people parrot all the time, even the Commander design team from WotC, I think that they're totally off base on this. White actually doesn't have the depth of effects that the other formats do for their signature effects. Like once you get past like the top 3 white removal spells, it's like pretty thin. And when you're playing a singleton format, that makes a huge difference.
Right.
Because like being able to play Force of Will and Force of Negation and Fierce Guardianship and like and means that you have like a ton of redundancy for that effect in a singleton 100 card deck. But if you've only got Path and Swords in your white deck, you are not the color of removal there, right? Like blue is the color of blue has it, black has it. Even red has it because you get cards like a Braid and Lightning Bolt and Shock and all that. Like those are all fine. But like, yeah, black has all of these great removal spells. Blue has a ton of great bounce removal spells. Like blue is the color of removal in Commander.
Sure. Well, and like, I guess we are on the white tangent because I want to, like, I agree. Like, I think, we've on this podcast argued a long time that at least Force Spike, if not Mana Drain straight up, could be a white card, right? Like leaning into that like taxing effects, or like, Spell Queller could just be a white card. Like a O-ring that's on I don't think it should be on an enchantment. I think a flash enchantment that countered a spell would be too strong, but on a creature, I think it's fine where it's easy to remove. And then there was the online discourse of like when white was really bad and Vince got involved, etc. And we talked a lot then too on like white's other problem in Commander. It's a bigger issue than even Modern, but in Modern it's an issue, is its card advantage does not create gameplay variety.
Yeah.
When blue uses its card draw engine, or its card advantage engine, which is card draw, I'm going to see a bunch of new cards and every single time get to do more things. When white uses its card advantage engine, it's stopping your opponents from doing anything else, and then you don't get to do anything else. You're now at parity. Now you've spent one card for all their cards, and hopefully you have more cards, but you're not seeing new cards. So we've actually, like, I think, argued pretty heavily that some version of scry, either like segmented into a large scry or small scry, if like card draw was off the table, which it ends up looks like that's not what's off the table. It looks like they're like figuring that out. But when that was like 100% white is never allowed to have card draw, we're like, okay, then give it scry. Let me see more cards. I don't have to have
increased card quality,
but let me at least get to the next one so I can like have choices and have more variety and experience. So
that's like kind of what I was talking about with creating a proactive anything. It doesn't even have to be resources, right? It's just a proactive game plan. It's not a reactive or like an anti-proactive game plan, like, because a lot of the white stuff, it's not really reactive. It's like preventing your opponent from being proactive. Right. That's not really reactive.
Well, that's the in Commander too. That's probably the best option for white, because the reactive stuff is you're losing parity unless it's a board wipe, right? It's always like 1-for-1, which is why like normally one of the reasons blue is bounce is so powerful in blue is you could use it on your own stuff for advantage or use it as a removal spell, right? And
or it's mass bounce,
or it's and with white, like target removal is relatively bad unless it's like one of the three that are good. And
even then they're bad.
Yeah.
If you're 1-for-1ing yourself in Commander, you will end the game losing with an empty hand.
Right.
It's just not good enough. Like it's good to prevent the game from ending, but if you're doing that consistently, you're going to lose.
And so then the other side of that option, which is the hate bear strategy or stacks, right, is I'm preventing my opponents collectively from doing anything, which then brings you to the conversation of like, oh, white's only good ability makes people hate Commander outside of cEDH.
So this is also why I think that white should have Stifle as part of its color pie, like primary. Is because, especially in the past like 5 years, WotC's creature design has skewed really heavily into immediate value on creatures.
Sure.
And that's spilled over into Commander too. Like if you look at Dockside Extortionist, right? Like what is a swords or a path going to do with a Dockside Extortionist?
Right.
Absolutely nothing. If you're playing white, the color of all the answers, you just cannot deal with Dockside Extortionist in any meaningful way.
You're playing like super proactive hate cards that are also limiting your game plan, like Stony Silence.
Yeah, right? You're playing like Stony Silence or Torpor Orb or whatever, right? And but yeah, it's the same thing like with Thassa's Oracle, like the huge boogeyman that everybody's talking about right now, right? Like white has no meaningful counterplay to Thassa's Oracle. Right. It just doesn't exist. It's Hushwing Griff, right? Or like Hushbringer or any of those. Like, but that's why I think that like, seeing as how white already has that like piece of shutting down ETB abilities on creatures, why not give it a counterspell that does the same thing?
And that's and this brings me to I think the last thing I want to talk about, because we are running close to time. Oh, yeah. Speaking of banning announcements from the modern one, we've just gone through the quarterly ban announcement for Commander. For those who don't know, Commander still kind of bans cards on a schedule attached to the sets that are being released on a quarterly basis, versus normally before the pre-release, so people don't buy cards and then a ban announcement happens that could mitigate issues there, versus Modern, which is now in the competitive circuit, which is like when Wizards thinks it's needed, they'll announce a week ahead of time that a ban announcement is happening. Which is a change for those who don't know that has happened, but no bans, no changes. of like the few times I've like realized I became a person on the internet, I like accidentally convinced people that Dockside Extortionists was going to be banned.
Is that where it started?
Yeah, I didn't need to.
Alex Kessler, you blew up my timeline.
So I posted a poll that was just like on the 23rd of February when the banning announcement is being made, and if Dockside Extortionists would be banned, how would you feel about it? And I put like happy, sad, whatever, and like maybe a little jokier, like I would murder someone, whatever, or like don't play Commander, right? Something along those lines. And people voted on it, and it was like relatively contentious anyways, right? It was like, but it was like a regular argument. But I, the normal, terrible at typing and confirmed information person of the internet that I am, put the 23rd and not the 7th as the date in the post. And Sheldon, being the very kind person that he is, commented, correcting me, being like, the ban announcement is on the 7th. And the internet took that to be Sheldon confirming that there will be an important announcement happening on the 7th, not just that I was wrong.
Oh, that's funny.
And then on top of that, I was going back and forth more in an argument on like, could Dockside Extortionists being banned, which I have thoughts on, and regardless of what my poll was. And I posted a second poll that was, is Dockside Extortionist better? Which card is better? Dockside Extortionist and Soul Ring. And Dockside Extortionist won. Partially because I put within context, or not in a vacuum, which is better, and a library of relatively high profile Twitter people or Magic content creators commented, because that's an insane statement to have had happened, that Dockside beat Soul Ring. As we talked earlier, Soul Ring is an insane card, and Dockside is in this poll coming ahead. And those two things together within a 4-hour period of each other convinced the world that Dockside was going to be banned.
Wow. Yeah.
And, ironically, this is the second time, I don't know if ironically is the right word, but this is the second time I've like accidentally found myself debating whether a card should be banned or not around Sheldon, and then him thinking I would want it to be banned.
Right.
I don't. So the first time was at Magic Fest Reno at Olivia's house. I was me, Vince, and Logan, and we were talking about should Cyclonic Rift be banned.
Oh yeah,
and
and the good thing is that Vince never has strong opinions about things. So I'm sure
ever. And I always back down from someone having a strong opinion and won't just argue with them for no reason. I would never. It was all Logan's fault, actually. Logan was really the problem.
Logan is an instigator.
If I've ever met him. And like, didn't really take it seriously, like don't want Cyclonic Rift to be banned, don't really even care. I think it's good for the format, and we'll argue to like that it's like a very, very, very large benefit to have that card exist. But then the next day, like during the like whatever roundtable they did, like, oh yeah, Alex Kessler thinks that Cyclonic Rift should be banned. I'm like, no. And now I think Dockside wouldn't. Like I think if we're gonna be honest, Thassa's Oracle is a card to be looked at, and we can have that conversation. But I think Dockside is a card to, like, now that the internet thinks I think it should be banned, I think Dockside Extortionist is a card that is fine right now, partially due to how expensive and the low card availability of it. And at more powerful tables, it's more powerful. At weaker ones, it's weaker. But I do think it's still like, we had it on Tappy's stream last week, and it won with 3. It like went infinite with 3 treasures, right? It's very easy for it to just like accidentally win. And that was a lower power level format.
So even at 3 treasures, compare it to something like Pyretic Ritual, right?
Sure.
And then say the Pyretic Ritual, the mana never empties from your mana pool. Right? That is already a really good rate.
Right.
And like, I don't know if I can count the number of Commander games where it's making only 3 ever.
Sure. Yeah.
And then it like scales up. That's like the base is that it's Pyretic Ritual, but way better.
Well, so it, like, as far as pointing out other cards on the ban list, like it reminds me a lot of a
Sylvan Primordial.
Neither. Because both of those cards actually I don't think were an issue. Like people always like, it's because they got mana. It's like, no, Primeval Titan got you a win condition, and Sylvan Primordial removed your opponent's things from existing. But it's Prophet of Kruphix. It reminds me a lot of Prophet of Kruphix, where it's like, I am just getting so much mana from this one card. And its Prophet of Krufix was negatively affected by being in better colors and like just being in blue green put it, I think, over the edge. And I think it is like it causes a more toxic gameplay environment moment than Dockside does, because Dockside always just like wins you the game.
Like Prophet of Krufix, the one of the main reasons why that ended up on the ban list was because it ends up in one person monopolizing the amount of time that is spent on the game, right? Because it's like, oh, you're just going to take a turn every time everybody else takes a turn. You're playing 4 times as much Magic as everybody else.
And Dockside doesn't have that issue. Dockside, in a mana production facet, though, like is comparable to me, and it like it's not available to people in a way right now that I think it's a problem. And but in my head, I'm like, they're going to reprint this card because they need to, regardless. Like like cards shouldn't just exist in a vacuum where it came out with in one Commander precon, and that's where it never got printed again. And when they do, that's when I think the conversation becomes more real. Because right now, everyone that has one is keeping it in their very best deck, which normally means it's normally fine. Or they're if I have this one card, I'm going to put it in my treasure deck. And then it's like the theme going on, and then fine. But the moment that it's like, oh, I can just put this in every red deck because I own 4 copies, is like, people are going to get sick of it real quick.
Yeah. And especially if that ends up being like a commander-centric product. Because like EDH Rec talks about this a lot, but the precon effect is real. Like, putting a card in a precon is a pretty solid guarantee that lots of people will play that card for a long time after, like one of the reasons why, and it's not even just precon, but like commander focused product, right? One of the things about Hull Breacher that was so egregious was that it was so splashable, right? It is one blue pip. It's one color. You can put it in any blue deck. You can slot it into a precon. Like it's so splashable, And Dockside has that same issue, where like if it was much harder to cast, like honestly, Dockside Extortionists could have been red, and it would still be an egregious design mistake.
I currently will put, and I'm forgetting the name of the card, but the 5 mana, make a red mana for every tapped land your opponents control.
Oh, Mana Geyser.
I have Mana Geyser in pretty much, I would say 90% of my red decks in Commander. And that costs 5 mana, and those treasures don't stay around.
Right. That's exactly it. Like the difference between ritual mana and treasures is there's a universe between them,
And it's one of the interesting with treasures, because it feels like Wizards was treating treasures as if they were worse than mana for like a second, which is like really wild, because like I can't imagine them printing Dockside Extortionist as a ritual. I think like, oh, that's too much of a storm card. We can't print it. But with treasures, it's fine.
Yeah. And they printed it like right around the time that they printed Underworld Breach, and like, surely nobody will ever figure out how to recur a creature repeatedly in Commander,
And though on the other hand, like, and this is the power level, like the part that we didn't talk about, which is like Wizards is printing new powerful stuff, and this is a conversation for every format. I want that to happen, and that's kind of a discussion that's going on today on Twitter, right? Is like, it's better for Magic players to be able to do cool stuff in Magic, and Wizards realize that. And Andrew Brown, when we had him on, even said it like, one of the big design philosophies that I was a part of, and it was a part of the Fire philosophy design process, was there should no longer be a rare that doesn't have a home. We should no longer make rare cards that aren't good somewhere. And it can be specific. It can be for Canadian Highlander. It can be for Commander. It can be for Cube or whatever. But these need to be for someone. Someone needs to open this card and want it. And
I asked Glenn Jones about that. Glenn, Jimmy Wong, and Gavin Verhey did a panel in Vegas in 2019 at Magic Fest Vegas 2019.
Yeah.
And that was like, it wasn't like right after Dockside came out, but it was like shortly after. I think Dockside was 2018. And then
2019 was the launch of, it might have come out at Vegas. Was that the release party for that set?
I don't think so.
Because it was like was at a Vegas. It might have been the year before that. Okay.
So, anyway, I asked them. I'm like, the big question that was on my mind, and it's like to some degree still on my mind, is like, WotC obviously has a concept of what makes something successful, right? Like, I mean, you run a company, right? You've got a concept in your mind of what makes your product successful. What are you going to step back and say, this was good? The rules committee has a concept of what the format looks like when it's successful, right? So what I wanted to know was how much daylight is there in between those two visions, right? Because they're motivated by different things. Like obviously profit is a motive for WotC where it isn't for the rules committee. But also you have a lot of passionate people working on Magic cards. Like if you've ever talked to a game designer at WotC, they do this because they love it, you know, because they are so passionate about this and they want to make cool stuff that Magic players love, right? It's not like a board member from Hasbro walking into R&D being like, I need Dockside Extortionists to cost 1 and a red so that we hit our profit targets this year, you know?
Right.
And like that's a whole different issue. But when I asked them, when I ask them like how much daylight is there, right? Like when I see something like Dockside Extortionists, when I see the rules committee say like this is not necessarily the format for the spikiest people in Magic, right? Like you're not necessarily going to be able to scratch every competitive itch you've got if you're only playing Commander. And then when I see R&D print something like Dockside Extortionists, which is very clearly aimed pretty squarely at spikier players, right? I'm like, you're putting this in a pre-constructed deck. Who are you trying to attract to the format? You know, like if this is the chase card, who are you attracting? You know, because if it is that type of player, then we've got an inherent conflict there, right? We've got R&D attracting people to the format, and the rules committee saying like, we're not really going to balance the format for them, and they got to come to terms with that. But those two groups are not talking. That's conflict,
right?
And one of the things that Glenn mentioned was that with Underfire philosophy, and you kind of touched on this earlier, but as long as a card has a legitimate use case at their like desired power level or their desired environment, which is like the use case where you're playing Dockside Extortionist and getting 3 treasures on turn 5 or something like that. As long as it's got that valid use case and it's not going to be like bulldozing those games, that the ceiling can be quite high and that's justifiable, right? Like very powerful use case of it can be extremely powerful.
And I think from Wizards' perspective, and I do agree with them, right? Like I think this is, and this has been my philosophy in life over everything, right? Anything that I love is they want everyone to play it, right? They want every card they want every player that plays Magic that has a chance of playing Commander to have a card printed for them that they love in Commander, regardless of where that player falls on any scale of competitive to social to whatever. And I definitely like, you know, I got into content creation. We made Top Decking with Greg Blanchett. And the point of that was, how do we make Magic cool to people that aren't Magic players? And it was like, oh, let's make Scrubs / the League in a card store. And and the purpose of that was like, oh, I can show this to someone that doesn't play Magic and they're going to think, oh, that's kind of funny and cool. I could maybe go into that environment versus like walking into a store in real life and like having 6 guys at the time, especially like turn to them and look at them like they're weird. And, you know, in Commander, being the largest format that is currently played in Magic and having 0 signs of that changing anytime soon, you need to be able to make homes for as many people as possible. And I disagree with the statement that Commander can't do that. I agree with your statement earlier of like the angle shooting vibe and also coming into the format with this air of I know better than you when you haven't experienced the format in reality. I mean, like I had that issue with Ben before he joined Commander. Like, I don't want to play it because it does this. And I'm like, it doesn't do that. That's not everything that like your assumptions about it aren't necessarily true. Yes, Signal Pest isn't a playable card in Commander, or it's hard to make that work.
I play Signal Pest.
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, and once we got into the world of cEDH, like that is what got him on board. But you know, nice. Fine. The one example I have. But yeah, so yes, the like staple aggressive card, Goblin Guide, maybe a better example that's a little less scalable, is not the most playable card, but it doesn't mean you can't play aggressive. You can play tempo. You can figure out how to troubleshoot. You can angle shoot in those ways. And that's true of anything, right? Anytime you enter a new situation, your preconceived conceptions applying to that situation runs into conflict, and that I think is happening with that. But I don't think that there's not a home for those players. I think there is like a Kibler, right? Like he's like 100% on board with Commander. And if you asked him 10 years ago what he thought about Commander, he'd be like, oh, isn't that weird? Like, you know, he'd have like either no opinion or negative ones. And So
and every time I talk to him now, he's built 4 more decks.
Right. Like literally, I saw him 2 weekends ago, and since then he's built 6 decks. Like,
yes.
Yep. I haven't even done that. At any point. And so like, if Wizards is going to print cards like this, if they are going to be going into the format being like, we want to push the limits in different directions so that different players have stuff that's cool for them, be it everything from Jeweled Lotus to Dockside Extortionists, I think that there is going to be moments where like the ban list is going to have to keep up in some way, or their Wizards is going to have to like get better at predicting the problems they're going to create and create such massively versatile answers against them that everyone's playing them.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I honestly, I truly believe that that R&D has a bigger impact on the format than the rules committee does. If you think about the number of new cards that enter the ecosystem every year compared to the new the number of cards that get removed, it's night and day, right? Like how many new cards were there last year? 1,000. So like, let's say, whatever the number is, are coming into the
22,000 cards were printed in 2018. Oh no, sorry. 22,000 cards exist. 1,800 cards were printed last year.
Right, 1,800, and I mean, like, I don't think every single one of those is a new card, but like,
no, I think that's when I asked for this information, they were saying 1,800 new cards were printed in
unique cards. Wow. So I mean, think about 1,800 unique cards,
which was record breaking. That was the largest of all time.
But then think of all of the different like combinations and permutations of interactions, right? Like it's an exponential number of interactions between those cards with themselves and those cards with the existing card pool. And how many cards did we get banned in Commander last year? 2?
2, I think.
Yeah, it was Golos and Hullbreacher.
Yes.
And it was 2, and that was up from 1 last year, right? Like that is the rate of cards being removed from the card pool. So like you've got somebody with a fire hose that is like full on spraying, and then you've got somebody coming in with an eyedropper saying like, oh, this is like this drop of water, no good.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, so this is like the reason I have this data in front of me is I did a TikTok where I did the math on this. Based on how many cards are currently on the ban list and based on how many cards are projected to be printed a year moving forward, how many cards as a percentage of the ban list should be being printed a year, do you think?
Yeah.
And it's 3.6, right? And like that's probably depending on, your point, like how much of those are new cards versus reprints.
Yes.
That's going to change. And I don't think we're going to have 2 false sets this year that I know of, unless Wizards.
But I think like
one in.
There's a couple confounding things in there. One of them is if there's too much ban list activity, you end up scaring people away from Commander because it is historically a very stable format. Because think about like, a lot of people will come to a Commander because their like standard decks rotate out of standard and they just don't want to keep up with standard. So they just build a Commander deck with the standard deck that they used to have, or, they play Commander as a board game. They play it once a month with their friends. Like they play it like I might play Settlers of Catan or something, right? Like I'm not on a podcast talking about Settlers of Catan because it doesn't occupy that much mental real estate for me. But there are people out there that play Commander that way, They buy precons and they sit in a box on their shelf and, every once in a while friends come over and play it. Or they like are able to go to the LGS once a month or something like that. It's important for them to be able to bring their deck to the LGS without getting broadsided by the fact that half their deck is banned, So I think that I don't know what that number is, but there is a point where too many bans makes for an unstable format.
Sure. And I guess, we're a modern podcast. We could talk about the 2 main formats where you actually have use cases. So Pioneer, I think, is an example of that happening, right? I think Pioneer will come back because I think the need for Pioneer has never gone away, but the launch of the format alongside the other things that have happened over the last 2 years didn't kill it. I know all of you Pioneer stands are still out there fighting for it.
Yeah.
But it definitely significantly inhibited its success. And then add like historic existing kind of at the same time as a competing concept. But and part of that was because of ban fatigue. That came out in the middle of the Fire Design, War of the Spark, Eldraine era, where basically from War of the Spark coming out to Ikoria coming out, and really if like Kaldheim, if you want to like go to Tybalt's trickery onward, there's just consistent bannings through that whole period. And then they decided to launch a format where like, oh, hey, here's a cool idea. We'll do a no ban list Pioneer and then ban a new card every week. And it just like was partially terribly timed due to the fatigue everywhere else. and then also like cool new idea that every person on the internet has asked Modern to do more than I would like to say. Like, oh, we should just unban every card and see what happens, and then ban cards from there. And it's like, no, that they did that in Pioneer and it murdered the format because people don't have, you're standing on quicksand. But on the other side, you do have Modern, which, you know, Modern has had these issues in the past, right? Where people are like, oh, bans happen a lot. I'm a little wary of it. But it's always kind of like, even through COVID, the fact that this podcast is like still has a large audience of Modern focused players, and beyond us, you know, that like that's one of the few formats that has survived in paper Magic. If not, I would argue that Modern currently is the only surviving paper Magic 1v1 format.
Yeah, I don't think that's controversial at all.
Real way. Yeah. And it survives through these ban periods. They're hard. And the one argument I would make about Commander is so much better at bouncing back from bannings that happen outside of one specific case than the Modern is, right? Like if there's a specific card banned out of a Modern deck, that deck is very inhibited for a period of time until they figure out another solution. Sometimes it's stronger. Death Shadow's out there, but most of the time you're just having to transfer into a new deck. And but in Commander, if you ban,
it's different when it's a commander getting banned. Like Golos is a use case there. I would also extend that to Leovold. Leovold, similar situation, not as popular as Golos, but similar situation where it's like it's the core of the deck.
No. Right? I think in Commander, and I would honestly argue that's the best part of Rule Zero. Not the best part. There's a lot of good parts of Rule Zero, but there's conversations about Turgid, right? That was one of the things Sheldon brought in his announcement. And there's always conversation about banning commanders. And I think the reason for Golos, I understand, and we can, there's discourse that I don't want to get
Golos ban.
Yeah, that's fair. I understood the idea of like, this is being banned from a diversity perspective. It is just better than every other. Like that was the angle. And I understand that on the other hand, you also got rid of a bunch of decks. I don't think you should ever ban a commander. Not totally. Like there's a once in a while. They're going to print something that's like, oh no, this is egregious. This should go away. But almost always, that's the thing you can Rule Zero the easiest. I can be like, I don't want to play against Narset. I don't want to, like, I can see you're putting it on the table. I can't give you my Excel sheet of Thassa's Oracle and Dockside and stacks cards that are specific and Wrath of God versus, or like, you know, if you have exactly 7.8 counter spells, I'm going to have less of a fun. Like that's an impossible list.
Yeah.
I can tell you, oh, I don't want to play against Jeskai Narset. Like that looks like a bad time.
Yeah, it's very easy.
And they're like, okay, I'll play a different deck.
Or they say, oh no, it's not that Narset. And you're like, oh, okay, I know it is though. Like, it always
you're
is.
Still, yes, yeah.
One of the main problems that I've had with the Golos banning was the like primary argument is exactly what you said. It's like, there's no reason not to play it. And I see that as one of the hallmark behaviors or things that people say that we associate with competitive environments, right? Like if there is a strictly version of a card, or strictly better version of a card that is available in a competitive minded format, right? Like if you've got a format that has Shock and Lightning Bolt, it is objectively correct to play Lightning Bolt in every situation, right? Like you're not going to play an even split of bolts and shocks. There's no reason to do that.
Right.
So that is a mindset that is like fine in Modern, or it's fine in Legacy, it's fine in Vintage and all that kind of thing. But I think when you start applying that mindset to Commander, like people have other reasons to play cards than just it is the best version of this effect that's available in the card pool, right? Like Chris Mooney from WotC has a deck that is just based around the number 4. It's a mono green deck because they could only find forests, you know? And so like all of the cards either had to have like 4 of something in the art or the word 4 in the title, or like they're 4/4s or whatever, right? Like it doesn't matter that there's a better card if it doesn't fit the theme, you know? And so I really have a struggle justifying a Golos ban by saying there is no reason to play any other commander other than Golos, because that seems like applying the logic that they're trying to get away from in other areas of the format as a justification for restricting the card pool for everybody. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
No, that's fair. The interesting thing about the goalless ban for me is it's one of the few bans that has happened that it not blindsided me, because it like blindsided.
It blindsided me. I was surprised.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
I'm in the room where they're talking about that stuff. I was surprised.
Yeah. No, I mean, when I say not blindsided, I mean, like, I don't think it was at the moment, and in my life, it was not as serious of a thing that like my life was altered. I like didn't have a goalless deck, right? Like it was like, oh, but I did not see it coming, right? It was not like on my list. It was kind of like, to some extent, the Iona ban. And I think the Iona ban, when you think about it with Painter Servant, which I know this is like not necessarily what was talked about, but Painter Servant coming off with Iona going on at least had a like, oh yes, those two cards together would suck. And I'd rather have this one than that one. And if you're like making me choose, fine. But I wasn't thinking Iona was problematic before that was banned. And I would argue it would be fine if it was unbanned.
I also don't like the Iona unban.
Yeah.
By the way, if you want to pull up an image here, pull up the EDH rec page for Painter Servant. What percentage of decks do you think, eligible decks, run Painter Servant?
19. I don't know.
19% of decks that can run a colorless.
Oh, no, that was total number 19.
Oh yeah, you're definitely closer with the total number.
Yeah. Like
it's like 3,000 decks, but it's the denominator is like 900,000 on EDH rec.
Sure,
it's in 0.0% of decks. It's a rounding error. Same thing with Worldfire. Worldfire is in under 1,000 decks.
Right. Well, I guess like the argument there, right, and this argument I would make in Modern, right, is no. I don't believe a card should be on the Modern ban list that wouldn't see play in Modern.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like
I would agree with that in EDH actually.
Yeah. Like I think
that we're not solving any problems if it's not modifying player behavior. Right. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect somebody to look at the ban list and glean some sort of philosophical argument.
Right. These are the cards about. I shouldn't play cards like this because this card is banned. It's
nobody gets that message.
To be honest, and like this happened. So we've like made, non-real formats before, and we made one kind of Highlander Roulette, and it's like you play 6 decks and they're all singleton and you have to be single amongst all of them, and it's a 1v1 format. And at one point the ban list was only foil cards were legal, or cards with foil printings, which would now be impossible because Secret Lair exists, and what does foil mean? But the first thing I did was look at every ban list and see what cards were legal. And like joining Commander, if I was joining the format, the first thing in my head, and this is nothing to do with me being a competitive Modern player, because I would argue that I am not that, would be look at the ban list like, these are the cards that are too good. What are cards that are close?
Yeah. I frequently, like I mentioned, I have a Flash Hulk deck. I frequently look at the ban list and I'm just like, hey, what can I do that kind of imitates this? Because it's like interesting,
it's forbidden fruit that you're like, a lot of people do.
It's like, I don't know, maybe I'm like chasing the Commander Dragon, or maybe I'm like an EDH hipster or something like that. But like, I want to do stuff that nobody has done before.
Oh, I think that's my argument, is the greatest strength of Magic. Like, I don't think it's the color pie. I don't think it's TCG being a TCG player. Whatever. I think it's that you are able to create something and test it out infinite amount of times and be as creative as you want to be, and get proof of purchase on how creative you were to succeed. Whatever that goal is. And
love that.
I think that like I agree with the discontinuity. That's not a word, is it? It's a Magic card.
Like incongruity kind of thing?
Incongruity of like the we are banning cards or unbanning cards based on these specific philosophy actions versus, we had like a conversation about this, is like, and there was a little bit of an attitude this week too about it, of like the banning announcements and the creation of the format is not for the LGS experience. Was kind of a sentiment that was, and once again, it felt like one of the same thing with pro players shouldn't come to Commander, that's not what was said, but that was the regurgitation of what was said. But with that statement, there was more of the point of like, it's harder for us to ban cards for environments where strangers will be playing each other versus friends playing each other. And that's fair. But I also think that when there's a moment that play does exist, and those are the ones that actually need a curation of some variety for them, versus I don't think friends need to be created. Like,
Kess, it's like you're in my brain. I agree 100%.
That's why I had you on. I just want to talk to myself. That's really
So one of the things that I've personally been talking about quite a bit is I think we should be setting more goals for the format, and I think we should be talking about the actions that we've taken in managing the format and assessing whether they were good or bad. This is something that I don't think we do a good job of right now. I think it's something that we could improve a lot. It's really tough to improve things if you don't know what direction you're going and you don't assess your actions in terms of whether they get you closer or further away from your goals. That's a really tough thing to do, right? Like you're basically just stabbing in the dark. Every once in a while you'll like connect with something, but it's not going to be a consistent thing at all. I would love to see us, set out, what do we think a healthy format looks like? What are the types of things that the ban list can accomplish, right? And then once we take a look at what it's possible to do with the ban list, what do we want to do with the ban list, right? Like the ban list is one way to influence player behavior. It's not the only way. But what do we want to do? How do we want to influence player behavior to make our format better? And that all starts with, what does the format look like when it's healthy? What is good? When we define that, we take a look at the tools that are available to move us closer to that, and we start looking at whether we're doing things effectively. This to me is like, I have this like model in my brain of what I want to see us do with the format. And I don't know if it's going to get traction. It might, it might not. It makes sense to me.
Sure.
I don't know if it'll make sense to the people that are actually making the decisions, but that's one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately.
One of the things I loved about the 3-month period of the unglued unbanning moment that happened, or the unset unbanning era, is the A/B testing feature of it. There was like a 3-month period where everyone found out, what does this look like? And it was known. It was like, this is going to end. You're going to have 3 months to try this out. These cards are cool. Let's have them be a feature of what we're doing. And then once it's done, people that have undecks, keep them. Well, no one's going to stop you from playing. This is Commander, but they're no longer going to be the thing that you should be expecting to walking to tables. Yeah. And I love, I mean, you talked about what we do. I love the idea of A/B testing. I love that I right now have a store that has 2 different hoops on shelves, and I get to, in the data, look at which one's doing better than the other one.
Yep. Well, and then you can also assess your actions, right? Like, is it a good thing for me to be doing this thing or this thing?
Right.
If you never like step back and look at it, and you never ask yourself, like, how can I be doing better? You're never going to get better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So yeah. It's a tough thing. One of the tough things is that like everybody on the Commander Rules Committee and everybody on the Commander Advisory Group, we're all volunteers and we all have day jobs. Sure. And we all, like I have a full-time day job, and then I also do like 30 hours of content creation a week. So right. I'm like putting in 70-hour weeks right now, yeah, it's kind of tough to ask more from people, but there's a lot of really smart people there.
Oh yeah, and it's one of the things, like, and obviously that now a few of the people on both groups are in Studio X's are under their roof. I think 4 total now, and I'm surprised that, like, obviously you don't want it to be under the roof. I think like anyone who's argued against that gets down a very deep hole that becomes weird in all different directions. But I do think Wizards could put resources towards it in that way of like giving resources to have some of that time. I think that would be like an interesting thing to see, where like you guys are now doing a lot of work for something that needs more effort, or needs more, theoretically could use the help of more effort from but needs a financial commitment to do that none of you can monetize off of.
Or even just like, I've got a lot of ideas for stuff that could be content. I don't want it to be content. I don't want to be personally monetizing it. I don't want my logo on it. Mm-hmm. I want Wizards logo on it, because I think, like, as you mentioned, right, one of the things about untrusted play is that it happens in local game stores, right? Mm-hmm. I can't be sure. Like when I go to my local game store, nobody knows who I am. Nobody's watching my videos. Like the staff know who I am because I've been going there for 10 years, but that's about it. The people that I sit down with on Wednesday Night Commanders have no idea who I am, So when we talk about like, what can we do to improve untrusted play in local game store environments, that's not coming from me, Jim from the Spike Feeders, right? Like I want this to come from like WPN maybe.
Sure.
Or like some kind of a distributed WotC resource that like, we all have a shared interest in this format being good. So I don't know, what tools do we have at our disposal to influence player behavior? I think that maybe WPN is one of those tools.
Sure. Like they're a group of people that have the most granular effort on a LGS experience that you have access to, right? That exists.
Even if it's just like distributing a set of tools that help, event organizers understand the format,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of event organizers look at Commander and they just want to throw money at it because they think it's a community that's going to be profitable for them.
Sure.
And they don't realize that like setting up a tournament on a Saturday where you can win pre-con Commander decks is going to bring people with a spiky attitude because they want to bring Commander, they want to buy or win Commander decks to go and flip and sell.
Right. Right. And
they just don't know that. It's not something that's obvious looking at the format.
And I think obviously there's like the caveat that Wizards is also like looking at how do we encourage people to play Magic safely in today, which is like one of the things I think that's limiting their total outreach here. But I do think like if them getting to a point where they're looking at, okay, this is now the most played format of Magic and we need to build tools for people to do this because this is becoming a conflict. Because I don't like the other one that people bring up is like, oh, there needs to be a separate ban list for different levels of difficulty. And I think that from the perspective of a person who has participated in, I think, 5 different fan-run multiplayer formats, as well as in currently vaguely making up my own with Artisan, where it's fun and people like playing it, and that's actually the most successful I've gotten in all of those endeavors. They don't last. They don't like Commander is a like Commander, Modern, Standard, and Legacy and Vintage are the 5 magical things.
It's lightning in a bottle for sure.
Like the amount of failed formats that are at Modern's feet and in Modern shadow between Pioneer and arguably, kind of historic and kind of arguably standard at this point, but and every version of Extended that existed is long, and Legacy and Vintage just benefit partially because they're just the everything formats. And so like if someone was going to be able to make a cEDH separated ban list, it would have been made already by fans.
There's a reason why nobody who anybody would want to do it wants to do it.
Right.
Like you point to the people in the community, like the typical names that people would toss up as like being capable and like positive,
theoretically motivated. Yeah,
none of them want to do it. Right. And there's like a couple of reasons. We could talk for another hour about that.
I know. I realized I was like, oh no. I've like started.
That's like a big topic. But I would say like my first thing there is typically a competitive format becomes competitively balanced by removing things from the card pool.
Mm-hmm.
It would probably make casual or like whatever other Commander there is a wider card pool to choose from, which means that it's a more powerful format.
Sure.
So if you want to do the most powerful things in Commander, you don't go and play the competitive format, which also means that people don't necessarily self-select to remove themselves from the Commander format and go to play the cEDH format,
sure,
which you need to do for it to be successful. Right. There's like a whole host of reasons why we don't think that it'll work.
My argument for it that's always been kind of the simple one for people listening that haven't jumped in and want hear somewhat more, but we don't want to go too in is if you separate cEDH, there's just a new cEDH in Commander. That doesn't go away.
That's exactly what it
there's someone's just like they're always going to try and make the best deck possible. And even if the ban list is totally different or the other format has their own ban list, cEDH will just have 2 formats and the other one will probably die. And it'll I guess the answer is the one that survives is the one with the better ban list for casual or more players. But and then you run into the Oathbreaker thing, which is Oathbreaker had more successful chances to succeed to me when it was a backwards compatible format. If I could make my deck accidentally an Oathbreaker deck, success. But the moment they started unbanning cards, like I now have to like fit a Primeval Titan in my Tomio box to be able to like
no, you can't
do both. And it's like you right now the best way to be successful is to be backwards compatible in that world. And I think that like what people want from this separated format would never work for those like for a lot and a library of reasons beyond that, which that then gets into an entire additional episode next time you're on, Jim.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about should cEDH.
Part 2.
Actually, I think I'm going to be on the Playing with Power podcast talking about that sometime in late February.
But that we've now gone a little bit even over our intended period of time. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we start wrapping up?
No, I would encourage anybody that's listening right now, if you want to try cEDH, there's some really cool stuff going on in cEDH. Mm-hmm. I would say approach it kind of the way you would Modern. Like start by learning what the meta is. Like learn what the best things you can do in the format are, And then that'll kind of inform your choices on, maybe what first deck you want to try, right? The concepts of Magic don't change, but it is a very different meta.
I got into cEDH from the exact same system that we tell people on this podcast to get into Modern. I went onto cEDH database. I asked a friend for what like the MTG Goldfish of cEDH was at the time, and it was the cEDH database. I looked at all the different things that were viable there. That's the top, whatever the top metagame on that is. I printed out a few proxy decks. I found some friends to test with me. I figured out the one I liked, and I slowly then built it.
Yeah.
Did it end up having my name in front of it with Kess? Yes, but that's me cheating and getting lucky. But it is, if you've listened all of the content we've ever made about getting into Modern, just apply it to cEDH, and it is almost directly applicable in a way that's kind of hilarious.
The decklist database is still a really good resource, and then also channels you can check out. We don't do a lot of cEDH anymore on the Spike Feeders. We've kind of taken a little bit of a step down on Power. But definitely check out Play to Win, Playing with Power. Both of those channels rule. There's a whole bunch of other ones, too many to name. Mental Misplay on Twitch. Alan is really great. There's a bunch of people. The main two, the big two, Playing with Power and Play to Win, are super accessible if you want to watch the games being played.
Sure.
And get a feel for what they feel like. Those are the best ways to do it.
I guess I think they still exist. I think the video of us playing cEDH with Ben for the very first time is still on this channel.
Oh yeah,
that you are watching now, so you can go watch that too. It's our top 3 Commander videos. I think is those first, partially because those first 4 were we're playing Commander for the first time, and then it was and we now do it every week.
Yeah, exactly.
But so those are definitely still up there with Braden and Ben and you, and so definitely check that out as well. But so beyond that, really quickly, I forgot to do all of the things I'm supposed to do. Make sure to check out all the links below. There's a bunch of sponsors. Ultra Pro is one of the reasons we're able to do this, and our weekly streams for Modern. Those that now happen every Sunday, as well as this is brought to you by TCG Player. There's an affiliate link below. If you click on it, you buy cards. While after clicking on it, it helps us. And then make sure to follow our Patreon. We did a whole conversation on the Nintendo Direct. Jim gave me a whole breakdown on the best things from it. And maybe some temperature-based conversations around Celsius. I forget if that was before or after we hit record. Celsius versus Fahrenheit. So definitely check that out as well on Patreon. So Patreon exclusive. If you are that, you get the whole episode a week early. You could be already listening to this conversation, but the next one, which is our Kamigawa set review. Where's the best place for people to find you, Jim?
Typically Twitter. If you want to get a hold of the Spike Feeders, which is a group of 7 people, it's just at the Spike Feeders on Twitter. And then if you want to get in touch with me personally, I'm at Jim TSF, TSF as in the Spike Feeders. That's probably the best way to go. We also have a Discord, but it's mostly paywalled. We have a little bit of a non-paywalled section, but it's mostly for our patrons.
Yeah. Awesome. And once again, thank you so much for joining. And we have to, obviously the sequel has to come up where we talk about a new cEDH and why it's a bad idea.
Oh, that is a whole episode by itself. I would actually love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, no, it'd be sweet. Future episodes. If you want that episode, hit that like button and comment below or other things you'd want me and Jim to talk about in that episode in the future. All right. Thanks everyone. And thank you, Jim. And we'll see you all next week.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.